Hey tea heads, this is Don from Mei Leaf. The video that you're about to watch was actually filmed in summer 2017, but we thought that we would hold it back for the first video of 2018 when everybody's a little bit more reflective and looking forwards for ways to improve their life. Everybody has their own life philosophies, but I thought that I would share some of mine with you. I hope that they're taken in the right way, and for some of you maybe, it will give you some food for thought in ways to improve the happiness in your life. If you like these kinds of videos, then please do let us know and we can certainly make some more. Thank you for watching. Hey tea heads, this is Don from Mei Leaf. In this video, 5 ways tea can make you a happier person. In this video, I'm going to be giving you my opinions on how tea can contribute to the happiness in your life. This video is going to go under the Tea Philosophies playlist. If any point in time you enjoy this video, then please give the video the thumbs up. The more thumbs in the air, the more tea videos are going to come your way. And if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel yet, then go click that button. I am on the stunningly beautiful island of Santorini. We've just spent a few days on the tranquil, peaceful and gorgeous island of Folegandros. If you're ever thinking of visiting the Greek islands, then you have to check out Folegandros. Tomorrow we're heading back to London, but we have spent a couple of days at a really nice Airbnb in Santorini. Santorini is a famed island, gorgeous, famed sunsets, the most stunning sunsets you've ever seen. It's a lot more touristy than Folegandros, but there are some incredibly scenic quarters and amazing spots to find in Santorini, so it's worth spending a few days here if you can too. And since we are in Greece, which is the seat of Western philosophical thought, I thought I would get a bit philosophical on you and discuss happiness and how tea can contribute to your happiness. So, what is happiness? Happiness is the ultimate and universal human endeavor. We all want it for ourselves and we all wish it for our loved ones. And yet the concept of happiness has become quite elusive and has been warped by people who want to control the idea of happiness in order to sell you things. So happiness has become equated to whether or not you consider yourself successful, whether or not you can afford that beautiful house, that new pair of shoes, or whether or not you have 3 million followers on Instagram. But this shouldn't be the definition of happiness. Let's break it down, let's take away all of that manufactured content and start to look at what happiness really is. For me, happiness is a feeling of contentment and joy. And this state we need to try and live as continuously as possible within. So no matter what life throws at us, we need to try to maintain that state of contentment and joy. Of course, we can get those temporary thrills of falling in love, your first kiss, extraordinary events in your life. But we need to try, in order to live a happy life, to maintain a sense of contentment no matter what is thrown at us. Now, in my opinion, there are 2 key foundation stones to happiness. I'll move on to the second one a little bit later, but the first one is taking control of your mind. In the West, we are stuck in a kind of Descartesian logic. Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." And this has kind of led much of Western thought to believe that the mind is equal to identity, the mind is equal to the self, and that basically we are all a result of electrical impulses going on in our brain. The idea of consciousness or the idea of self existing outside of the mind is alien to Descartesian logic. And I think that the old philosophies and the old religions and a lot of modern psychology is starting to move away from that and understanding that the self can be separate from the mind and the mind is a tool. It's a tool to help us to get to places. It's a tool to help us in our life. Imagine your mind is a car. A very powerful car. It will help you to get to your destinations, but we need to also know how to control the car, and we also need to know how to switch off the engine and get out of the car from time to time. I believe that the Descartesian idea of the mind being equal to the self is quite passive. It kind of it makes you imagine that the mind is somehow the king and you basically need to help it to express your identity. But this passive approach means you also look at emotions in the wrong way. You think of emotions as a kind of instinctive, uncontrollable reaction to life's events. If you treat the mind as a tool and you think of the mind being separate from the self, then the corollary to that is that whatever life throws at you, your mind is what creates the emotions, and if you can train your mind, you can EQ your life to be in a stronger, more happier spectrum of emotions. So here is one of the most crucial points regarding happiness. The majority of the suffering in your life exists in your head and not in reality. The very famous Stoic philosopher Seneca said exactly that. He said, "We suffer more in our imagination than in real life." I'm especially swayed by two schools of thought that were created at around the same time on different sides of the globe. Stoicism on one side and Buddhism on the other. Both of these philosophies and modern psychology like cognitive behavioral therapy believe that the emotional state of a person is a result of their internal reaction to external events. So how you deal with things internally and how you process things is fundamental to life. Hello, little cat. Come here. We can talk about happiness together. So how can we train our mind so that we don't go through unnecessary suffering? This is really one of the key aspects of being a happier person. Now, Buddhist philosophy, ideas of meditation, ideas of emptying your mind, ideas of relinquishing yourself from cravings and desires is one way. There's also mindfulness. But both of these ideas, mindfulness and mind emptiness or meditation, involve the same thing really. Essentially what we're trying to do is appreciate what we have and live in the present moment. Now, if you think about negative emotions, the majority of negative emotions come from your mind dwelling in the past or thinking too much about the future. So, for example, fear, anxiety, dread, those all come from thinking too much about the future. Then you have anger, resentment, sadness, depression. This comes from spending your time looking backwards and your mind dwelling in the past. If you live in the present and you spend more time being present and being mindful of what you have now, then you will magically relinquish yourself from these negative emotions. Now, this is not to say that negative emotions don't have benefits. Of course, fearing something makes you potentially avoid dangerous situations. It also helps to motivate you to prepare for certain things coming up in the future. Also, looking backwards and feeling sad helps to appreciate what you have, helps you to learn from your mistakes. So negative emotions have a value. They have an evolutionary value, but we have to be very careful that we are using them for our benefit and that we are not putting ourselves through unnecessary suffering. And so, being present, living in the present, being mindful of what you have now is one of the fundamental areas of happiness. So how do we achieve this? How do we achieve this real state of being in the present? Well, one of the ways to do this is through extraordinary experiences where you overload your senses. For example, jumping out of a plane or taking psychedelic drugs or having intense physical sexual experiences. You can have these moments where it's just so much for you to take in that you can't think about the future, you can't think about the past, and you can only be in the present. The problem with this, of course, is that you can't do this every day, and also that over time your body and your mind will get used to that level of sensory overload, and so you will need more and more and more. And when you don't have it, you will have a hole that you're craving to fill. Another way of achieving this state of presence and being in the present is through meditation, and this is something that the Buddhists really push forward. And the idea that you can kind of step back, step out of the car, remove yourself from your mind, and reach a state of no thought or no mind, where yourself is independent from the mind. And this is a very difficult state to achieve, especially for most of us in the West that have been brought up with this kind of Descartesian idea of self and the mind, but it's very valuable and very important. The third way that you can achieve this state of being in the present is through mindfulness, is through making sure that you focus all of your attention on exactly what you are doing and what you are experiencing now. A Stoic idea is that you basically consider every action that you do the last action in your life. And that's a very radical and dramatic way to really zone in, focus in, and appreciate everything you have and that single moment. And I think that this third way, the mindfulness way, is the easiest way to develop this idea of living in the present through your daily life. And I think tea helps you to do that. So we're going to move on to our first point about tea. So we've got 5 ways that tea can make you a happier person. The first way is the aesthetics of brewing. In order to be mindful and present, it helps if your activity involves something which is beautiful, meaningful, and natural. And loose leaf and its transformation into tea is aesthetically captivating. A loose leaf session brings you closer to nature and to the connection with the fields and the farmers that grew those leaves. So tea can be both grounding, but also helps to be voyaging. It helps you to kind of travel in your mind's eye. The color, the texture of the leaves, the hue of the tea liquor is visually engaging, with so many variations between different teas and different infusions within the tea session. The tactile and visual appeal of the teaware, the warmth of the water, the way that the tea pours, the rising steam, these are all visual aesthetics that help to captivate you and bring you back to the present. There's also symbolism in the tea session. The transformation of the leaf from dry to rehydrated gives an underlying sense of rebirth and returning to a natural state. The way that a tea opens and gives its shifting flavors over different infusions before fading helps us to accept the inevitability of change and our own mortality. In these and many other ways, the aesthetics of the tea session help us to achieve a kind of meaningful mindfulness. It brings us back to the present and gives us these kind of metaphors, which helps to give you perspective, which hopefully leads to a happier life. The second way that tea can make you into a happier person is through the attention of the brewing process. Now, tea requires 3 things. It requires the leaf, it requires water, and it requires you, the brewer. You are fundamental, and if you are not fully present, then the chances are that you're not going to be making as good a tea as you could do. Small changes in the parameters can lead to radically different tastes in the tea, even if it's the same leaves. Throw into the mix that there are many different types of teaware, all the different types of material, the hundreds of different types of tea, and the thousands of different batches produced year on year. Throw into that the fact that you have all the different infusions within the same tea session, and you have a myriad of complexity that draws you in and makes you present within the tea session. The art of trying to express not only the character of the leaf, but your own personal preferences in what you like to taste is another metaphor, I think. It shows that there are some things in life that you can control, and there are others that you can't control. And you need to work on the ones that you can control, and work with nature, not fighting external events, but work with it. Again, a very stoic approach, work with nature in order to achieve the best possible result. The third way that tea can make you a happier person is through the tasting of the tea. Now, tea tasting fundamentally brings you into the present. The reason for that is, unlike kind of big flavor, big hitting foods, with tea you have a rich and diverse palette of aromatics, but you need to search for them. They're expressed in a subtle, light and elegant way, so you need to hunt. And that hunting process is very engaging. It draws you in. It means that you can spend hours tasting the tea, and you can bring about really personal and individual tasting notes. I can think of no other food or drink that has such a kind of diverse journey in its tasting process, from the smell of those warm leaves, the smell of the wet leaves, the taste of the tea, the texture and the finish of the liquor, the smell of the empty cup. I mean, you have so many different processes of the tasting in tea, and you have many different infusions, and so you can really spend hours and hours tasting the tea and drawing yourself into the moment. And it doesn't just stop at the tea session. As you start to become more excited about tasting tea, what happens is you start to pull in other references. You start to smell and to taste more in your day-to-day life in order to give yourself a better lexicon, a better dictionary of tasting notes to help you when you are tasting your tea. And so this kind of this hunt for aromatics, this hunt for descriptions, this hunt for references leaves the tea session and starts to become part of your daily life. So you start to bring in this idea of being present into your daily life through the appreciation of tea. The fourth way that tea can make you a happier person is chemically, through L-theanine. L-theanine is an amino acid which exists pretty much exclusively in tea. Within half an hour of you drinking tea, the L-theanine amino acid will cross the blood-brain barrier and actually affect your brain chemistry. And it has quite radical effects on your mood, energy, and stress levels. L-theanine helps to increase dopamine and GABA, which brings about a sense of relaxation and calm. L-theanine also stimulates alpha brainwave activity. This is an alert but relaxed state and is exactly the same brainwave activity that you achieve in a meditative state. And therefore, tea is kind of like your life hack to kind of shortcut into a meditative state. And it's one of the reasons why tea has been used throughout history by Buddhist monks. L-theanine works synergistically with caffeine, so it gives you the energy and the alertness whilst keeping you calm and relaxed. And this is key to being productive, key to making sure that you reduce the amount of errors you make in your life, which will reduce your frustration and hopefully lead to a happier life. So we've talked about the 4 ways that tea can make you a happier person, mainly related to your mind. And we've gone through the initial foundation stone of happiness, which is training your mind to be happier. Now let's talk about the second foundation stone of happiness. Now the second foundation stone of happiness may seem obvious to everyone when I say it, but this is the result of a study, the longest ever study, 75-year-old study that's been done by Harvard University researchers. It started in 1938, and this was a study into happiness, amongst other things. So in 1938, these Harvard researchers recruited 238 Harvard undergraduates, and over the past 75 years, they have been following them, meeting them, and recording the intricacies of their lives. This has now been extended to include these participants' offspring. So we've got another 1,300 contributors to this study. The conclusion of this research is very clear. Happiness is not fundamentally dependent on things like belongings, success, your location, etc. Happiness is dependent on relationships, on having strong, close, and trusting relationships. The second part of the conclusions of this study is that we also need to develop mechanisms, and again this relates to the mind and how you deal with external events, but mechanisms to cope with failure and setbacks so that we don't push away those valuable relationships. So having strong relationships and developing mind training, as we've talked about before, so that you don't succumb to setbacks and push away those valuable relationships, are the findings of this very, very long and fascinating study. I'll put a link in the description below so you can check out more about that. So fundamental to happiness is loving, close relationships, the ability to talk to people, the ability to share. And it's not about quantity, it's not about how many friends you have, it's about the quality. It's about the quality of your partnerships. It's about the quality of your loved ones. It's about the quality of your relationships. This is key. So I've discussed how the mind is the seat of suffering and therefore the majority of suffering, and therefore if you train the mind you can have a happier life. And I've also talked about how companionship and relationships are fundamental to happiness. And it's interesting because I've spent, 20 minutes talking to you, but Shakespeare, the greatest poet of all time, managed in a typical Shakespearean way to write it in the most efficient way possible in King Lear. I hope I'm not too pretentious here, guys, but he wrote a quote which I think is very, very powerful, and that is, "Who alone suffers most in the mind, leaving free things and happy shows behind. But then the mind most sufferance doth o'erskip, when grief hath mates and bearing fellowship." In other words, who alone suffers most of the mind. Most of the suffering exists in your mind. But if you have companionship, if you have fellowship, you can overcome that suffering. So how does tea fit into all of this? Well, this brings us on to our fifth and final way that tea can make you a happier person. Throughout history and across the globe, tea has been used to build stronger relationships. Sitting down and sharing tea, sharing the tough times, celebrating the good times with people has been a fundamental aspect of tea drinking. And I think the reason for this is, as I said before, the chemical effect, the L-theanine, the ability to stay alert but calm, the meaningful symbolism in tea and the brewing process, the aesthetics of tea, the way it brings you back into the present, means it is the perfect centerpiece for sharing conversation. And if that conversation becomes stagnated and loses its flow, then you can flip and you can start to focus in on the tea itself. You can focus in on the taste. You can start to discuss the tasting notes. You can start to therefore discuss memories and thoughts and ideas, and that moves to aspirations, and that moves to all these different conversation points. So I find that the tea session is an incredible way to have a conversation with someone, because you can flip between things that are meaningful in their lives and then moving into focusing on the tea and discussing the tea, and then flipping back and forth between the two, and you get this seamless conversation between things that are happening in life, in their life, in your life, and things that are happening right now in the table, the tea brewing and drinking process. And so therefore you can start to build very strong relationships. And we're really fortunate at Mei Leaf. We've received letters from tea heads across the world, actually, thanking us for helping them to re-engage, relink and reforge relationships with their siblings, their partners, their parents through tea, through gong fu brewing and tea sessions. And that is a really, really touching thing for us, and that means so much to us. And that brings us onto this relationship, the relationship that we have with you, and the relationship that you have all together. And I know that we're all strangers, but we have a shared love of this amazing, amazing drink. And I hope that this tea head community and the relationships that we are forming can help to contribute to your happiness. That's it, tea heads. If you made it to the end of this video, then please give the video the thumbs up. Check out our YouTube playlist and let us know if there are any videos you'd like us to make. If you're ever in London, then come visit us in Camden to say hi and taste our wares. If you have any questions or comments, then please fire them over. Other than that, I'm Don from Mei Leaf. The sun is setting on beautiful Santorini. Thank you for being a part of the revelation of true tea. Stay away from those tea bags. Keep drinking the good stuff and spread the word, because nobody deserves bad tea. Bye.